about people, she is talking about ghosts hanging around what some say is a real-life haunted house in Metro Detroit.
Haunted houses pop up all over the place this time of year.
A new Wall Street Journal report profiles the many parents who think they can see ghosts, specters, and mysterious movements on their advanced baby monitors.
Baby crib.
I freaked out. I stopped what I was doing and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my daughter.
Heather says this so-called ghost scratched her daughter Lily and attacked her too.
You are tuned in to the Ghost Signal. Hello, dear listeners, spirits, and specters, and welcome to the Ghost Signal. My name is Jeff, and I will be your control operator this morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are across the 24 time zones. If this is your first time finding the Ghost Signal, welcome aboard. If you are returning, welcome back. This is episode 16, Death Takes a Holiday, in which we go to Kansas for two creepy tales from the beyond. This episode was originally slated to be a continuation of episode 15, where I was supposed to conclude the tale of the Haskins family, but that will have to wait until next time. Just a few days before this recording, my dad was in the hospital to get a pacemaker put in, but as they were prepping him for his surgery, he had a massive heart attack and passed away. So this episode is dedicated entirely to his memory. If you like what you hear, check out the website theghostsignalpodcast.com. There you will find a merch store, you'll find the way to the Ghost Signal Patreon and Discord server, and a link to email me directly if you have any terrifying tales of your own you'd like to share. Also, listen to the Grey Rooms podcast. In Salina, Kansas, there once stood Washington High School. As the town started to grow and change, so did the school districts, and eventually the school was phased out. But sometimes the stories and legends don't fade away, and we're left with urban legends that hide small hints of the truth inside. Prepare for dead air.
Dead air.
Joyce was a petite blonde beauty and one of the most popular girls at Washington High School in Salina in 1949. She was the treasurer of the student council, a member of the Honor Society, and the 1948 homecoming queen. According to a former classmate, Joyce was always the girl every boy wished to be his girlfriend. Before graduating in the spring of 1949, she also won the part of the female lead in the all-school play, Death Takes a Holiday. Joyce's character, Grazia, was a metaphor for kindness and beauty. The author of the original 1928 play, Alberto Casella, had death personified as the character Death take a 3-day holiday on Earth from his duties as the Grim Reaper. He fell in love with the winsome Grazia after saving her from dying in a car wreck, but when Death's holiday ended, so did Grazia's life, as Death took her with him at the end of the play. The Washington High production of Death Takes a Holiday was a success, partly because of Joyce's winning performance as Grazia. After graduating from Washington that spring, Joyce enrolled at Kansas University, and she left Salina for Lawrence in the fall of 1949 to begin her freshman year. In the spring of 1950, almost exactly 1 year after her role as the ill-fated Grazia, Joyce was killed in a head-on crash between the convertible in which she was riding and a gasoline transport truck on Kansas Highway 10 between Lawrence and Kansas City. Death was not on a holiday that day. Joyce was thrown from the car and died instantly. The other 3 young people in the car, all students at Kansas University, were also killed. Joyce, like Grazia, was 18 when death claimed her for his own. It is hard to pinpoint exactly when the stories of a benevolent ghost haunting the high school stage began, but certainly the macabre coincidence of life imitating art in such a tragic fashion for Joyce was a strong impetus for the formation of the legend, as were the similarities between Joyce and the character of Grazia in terms of beauty, personality, and age. Tales began circulating of the ghostly figure of a beautiful girl, dressed in a pink dress similar to that supposedly worn by Joyce in her last performance at the school, seen wandering high above the stage in the catwalk area, or glimpsed moving about the auditorium or behind the main stage curtain. 2 years after the accident, the new Salina High School building opened, replacing the old Washington High. Legend holds that the theater curtain from the stage at Washington High was moved to the new building and that the ghost moved with it. Although it seems unlikely that the old curtain was moved, the former Washington School and its auditorium were used for community theater for years after the new high school opened, curtain apparently intact. This remains a firm tenet of the legend, and so it is generally accepted as fact. Salina High became Salina Central High School, but still the stories of the theater ghost persisted. Always helpful, the ghost was credited with whispering lines to forgetful thespians, steadying actors about to trip, and blinking lights at appropriate times. Oftentimes the stories mentioned a face that could be seen in the old theater curtain, the supposed visible proof that Joyce had come along with the old curtain to the new school. A 1972 graduate of Salina Central recalled that the old curtain, supposedly the holdover from Washington School, was ratty and torn. In a story entitled The Ghost of Central, in the 1982 Salina Central yearbook, this graduate recalled details of the strange silhouette known as the face in the curtain. On the side stage lining there was a stain, a water spot, that resembled a face real clearly. The strange thing was, it was different at times, a full face once, then a profile, then 3/4. This individual also vividly recalled what she felt was an encounter a friend of hers had with the watchful ghost. The friend was on the grid or catwalk, high above the stage, crawling along because there was no room to walk. It was dark and dangerous in this position, since the grid was in an area above the stage lights that contained holes and openings that could prove to be treacherous to anyone moving along it. Suddenly the girl crawled into a real distinct cold spot. Then she felt something that felt like a hand on her shoulder holding her in place. She stopped and creeped forward to find a hole in the grid she wasn't aware of, 6 inches in front of her. Obviously, the impression left by this experience is that someone, or something, physically intervened to protect the young girl, who was in imminent danger of falling and seriously injuring or killing herself. Was it Joyce? This informant felt that it could have been. Regardless, she remained convinced some 10 years after her experience that there is some type of force in the central auditorium. When you're in the theater, there is a general feeling of someone else being around, she said. There is a presence of something else. But I was never afraid. I always felt it was benevolent. Over time, the stories of the protective theater ghost continued to grow and be embellished by the students at Central, and variations were passed down from class to class, particularly among the drama students. In 1977, a Kansas State University student who had recently graduated from Salina Central told her version of the story to the Kansas State Collegian newspaper. It was around Christmas years back. The drama students were doing the play Death Takes a Holiday, and there was a part in it where a girl was decapitated in a car accident. The girl never got to play her part and was replaced by her understudy. Before opening night, she was in a car accident and decapitated just like the character in the play. Some of the details have been changed in this version, the performance at Christmas instead of spring, the girl being killed before the play rather than after, and the explicit mention of decapitation. But the basic story, although embellished, remains the same. This source also asserted that the ghost of the doomed actress returns whenever a play opens, and she indicated that technical workers and light crews have reported seeing a white shadow who plays pranks such as causing all of the auditorium seats to come flopping down. In 1982, the drama director at that time, Richard Junk, tired of all of the stories and decided that restaging the infamous play Death Takes a Holiday would help bring about an end to all the rumors. Knowing the play was never put on here in Salina Central, he was quoted as saying, "I personally don't hold much credence to the entire story. In the last 2 or 3 years, the story has been blown out of proportion. One unshakable story asserted that the school officials would never allow the restaging of the play because of the ghost. Junk also wanted to prove that particular rumor to be false. As he recalled for a Salina Journal article in 1984, he was determined to do something about it. It was getting out of control. Every time I turned around, someone was talking about it. The play was presented in the spring of 1982 in the Central Auditorium, 33 years after Joyce started Grazie and the Salina High production. No mishaps occurred, but the stories of Joyce and her ghostly presence were not laid to rest. We had absolutely no trouble with it, Junk recalled in an interview with the Salina Journal in 1984. And I thought it would end. Obviously, it didn't work. Junk also expressed his opinion that the persistence of the story among the students is due not to a belief in the ghost, but to the fact that they enjoy the story. It makes them feel special, he said. Several drama students were also interviewed in the 1984 newspaper article about the legendary ghost of the Central Theater. One senior indicated that he did believe in the ghost and reiterated that everyone in drama does. He also recounted an incident when he was alone in the theater and heard a soft voice calling his name. I turned around, and no one was there, he said. However, a junior thespian dispelled the idea that all members of the drama class believed in the ghost of Joyce. It's just a good story. A lot of theaters have ghosts. I'm not sure if anyone actually believes in it. Whether anyone really believes the story or not, it continues to be perpetuated by individuals who have come in contact with the legend of Salina Central's ghost. A current version collected from a Washburn University student from Salina even reveals the belief that multiple phantoms haunt the backstage area of the central stage, all the ghosts of former high school actors. Students at Salina Central maintain a scrapbook that contains articles about the legend and the ghost of Joyce. In 1997, Brad McDonald was director of the theater at Salina Central High School. He verified that the story was still very much alive in his department. None of my students claimed to have experienced anything unusual, but when anything goes wrong or anything unusual happens, we tend to say Joyce is at it again. We tend to crack jokes about it. Eventually, every year, we get to talking about her. According to McDonald, this is how the legend has sustained itself, through oral sharing of the story with each year's new crop of drama students. Although McDonald said he knew of custodians in the building who have claimed to experience things while working late at night in the building, he insisted that his kids haven't experienced anything. The theater director felt that knowing the story of Joyce was an initiation ritual or bonding experience among the drama and theater students. Maybe eventually we'll make it a requirement, he joked. For anyone to graduate, they have to recite the story of Joyce. Unlike the former drama director who was annoyed by the stories, Brad McDonald seemed to accept the legend as part of the theater tradition at his school. Like the former director, however, McDonald considered a restaging of the play that has itself played an important role in the legends of Salina high schools. There is a possibility that I might decide to produce the Death Takes a Holiday play again. I always keep the schedule a secret until we announce the next season's production at the spring banquet, but we may restage it at some point. Interestingly enough, in 1996, Universal Pictures released a remake of the 1934 film Death Takes a Holiday, and it was entitled Meet Joe Black. The star of the film was a former young thespian from Kickapoo High School in Springfield, Missouri, named Brad Pitt. A grim initiation rite, having to recite some version of the story to your classmates to graduate. Whatever the truth is, theaters and playhouses tend to have the reputation of being haunted as much as any retirement home or cemetery. Our next story comes from my hometown of Atchison. After all, this is where my dad took me to see Ghostbusters when I was 6, and for weeks and months afterward I was chasing ghosts all over town with my ectoplasmatic containment unit, as he called it. It's all your fault, Dad. Here's the official, unofficial story of Molly's Hollow in Jackson Park, Atchison. It's time to clock in for the graveyard shift. Molly's hanging from her tree. Hanging and twisting, her body is moving ever so slightly in the breeze. The rope creaks on the bark of the tree branch. The midnight moon rising behind Piano Cliff casts an eerie glow on Molly's hollow, and spotlights Molly's poor body suspended by its neck. A mournful moaning sound begins to rise like mist from the river, slowly building, increasing in intensity and pitch. Louder and louder, closer and closer, until, at the stroke of midnight, the scream bursts forth in full voice, the sound shattering the stillness in Jackson Park. The piercing sound cuts through the wind like a knife, slicing through the air and the tree and the rope until, abruptly, Molly falls and disappears. Molly's tree is gone, cut down, and Molly's hollow is gone too, filled in. But the legend of Molly and Molly's hollow is still very much present in the tangled interior of Jackson Park along the Missouri River. Molly's legend is a complicated one, with at least 3 distinct storylines and numerous versions. The time frame of the story depends on the teller, but the setting is always the old hollow in the park. Who Molly was and why she was in the park differ from version to version, but Molly's ultimate end is also a constant. She either hangs herself or is hanged by others, her body left to sway in the breeze in the hollow. The legend of Molly's Hollow is a very good example of a durable, multi-generational legend that mutates and changes to fit the concerns and realities of each succeeding generation or group of tellers. Molly's story started out as one of Civil War-era racial tensions and ended up a modern tale of a suicidal or murdered co-ed. Even though the landscape has changed culturally as well as physically in regard to the legend, the story lingers on as a fixed feature in Atchison's folkloric scenery. Cindy Jones Blanton is the assistant director of the Atchison Library, the children's librarian, and a self-described teller of tales. Cindy first heard the tale of Molly before 1960 when she was in elementary school in Atchison. It was told to her as a slavery story, a story dating back to the very earliest days of Atchison. According to Cindy, Molly was a black woman who was hung because she was caught with her master in a compromising situation and was hung from a tree in what is now Jackson Park. At midnight, Cindy said, you can hear her scream near where she was hung. Similar versions of the legend are more specific as to who was directly responsible for Molly's death. Molly, a young slave girl, was thought merely to be spending too much time with her master and was rounded up in the park by the white women of the town. The following morning, young Molly's body was found hanged in a tree overlooking the Missouri River. Cindy remembered going to Molly's Hollow as a child. You could look up the road and see the tree and the branch she was hung from. The bluff is right there. There is an opening in the bluff right by the pond. The hollow and the tree are gone, but you can still see the area and go up to Piano Cliff right behind Molly's Hollow. Cindy also remembered hearing sounds that convinced her she was hearing Molly's screams. She recalled that it was always a Halloween thing at Jackson Park to go out and listen to Molly holler at midnight in the hollow. In fact, she said, some people refer to the site as Molly's Holler instead of Molly's Hollow. According to Cindy, the 1950s and 60s era legend she heard about was always a slavery-based legend, and Molly was always a black woman. The legend harkened back to a time when Atchison and other Kansas towns were a part of a bitter war between anti-slavery and pro-slavery forces in Kansas and Missouri, a time when Kansas was known nationally as Bleeding Kansas. Cindy interpreted the legend of Molly as functioning as a cautionary tale to remind us of the horrors of slavery. Another vivid element of the legend portrays the sound of the anguished Molly screaming, a sound that can be heard in the vicinity of the hollow only at the stroke of midnight. Cindy revealed that an industrial factory located a short distance downriver from the hollow used to sound a midnight whistle to designate a shift change, and she believed that was the sound that she and others heard and mistook for the ghost of Molly's unearthly screams. By the time the sound of the whistle drifted up there to the park, you heard, or thought you heard, a high shrill voice. A more contemporary version of the legend of Molly centers around the hollow as a local lover's lane for teenagers and college students well into the 1970s. Molly and her boyfriend, both teenagers, are parked on the road under Piano Rock Ledge. The couple quarrels and breaks up, or perhaps the young man informs his girlfriend that he is no longer interested in her. The distraught Molly gets out of the car and tells the boy she wants to walk home. He drives off and leaves her in the park, and the next morning she is found hanging from the tree, a suicide, swinging in the breeze in Molly's hollow. Again, in this version, on moonlit nights, the body of Molly is visible swaying below the branch of the tree, and the sounds of her tormented screams are heard in the hollow and down the river. Many versions assert that those screams have been heard throughout Jackson Park over the years. A 32-year-old waitress at a local restaurant in Atchison recalled her memories of Molly's Hollow. When I was in Girl Scouts about 16 or 17 years ago, we would go on hikes around there and around Molly's Hollow. When you listened, you could hear her scream. I don't know if it was because we thought we should or we wanted to, but we could hear her scream. A different contemporary account placed a slightly older Molly, a co-ed from an Atchison college, at the park one night with a group of friends. For a prank, her friends left her there alone in the hollow in the dark. When they came back later to find her, they discovered that she had been murdered by an unknown assailant and left hanging by a rope from a tree. This version was told by a woman in her mid-40s who grew up in Atchison. In her account, anyone who went out to Jackson Park at night could go to Molly's Hollow and see her shadow hanging from a tree. If her name was called out, the story said, she would scream in response. The woman who told this tale took her nieces and nephews out to the park to tell them the story. According to one of her nieces, who lives in Topeka, she took us to Jackson Park and she scared us to death. Molly's Hollow was filled in toward the end of the 1980s by a local foundry, and the legendary tree was cut down. A small park area over the filled-in hollow now buries the site of Molly's supposed demise. Whether some core of truth exists within this legend is unknown. Another story indicates that many years back a man named Marlowe lived in the hollow in a little house, and the hollow came to be known as Marlowe's Hollow. Perhaps Molly's is just a corruption of Marlowe's, and the entire legend was created to explain the naming of the hollow for a girl named Molly. For whatever reason, the legend of Molly's Hollow is the dominant legend in the Atchison area, one of a handful of quite complex and ever-changing legends in the state. The ghost, or the figure of Molly, takes on different forms, different eras, and different storylines, but it remains a legendary character rewoven into contemporary stories that still serve a purpose in the present-day culture of the city. Molly is a slave woman, a girl murdered in a horrible way that was all too common in times past, points out the injustice of prejudice and the inhumanity of slavery. Molly as a teenager or a co-ed left behind in a dark and isolated place is a cautionary tale against teenage parking on lovers' lanes and a warning against a reckless foolhardiness that abandons a vulnerable individual to the diabolical forces that lurk in the shadows. When I was a creepy little kid, I went on a hike through Jackson Park with everyone else in my summertime daycare. That was the first time I ever heard of it, and it terrified me. The tree still stood and the hollow wasn't filled in yet. The kids in charge told us young ones to never ever go in there after dark, or the ghost of Molly will hang you from her tree, and I believed it hook, line, and sinker. And that's it for episode 16. If you made it all the way to the end, you have my sincerest gratitude, dear listener. With the paranormal podcast market as oversaturated as it is, it's difficult to get noticed, but if you like what you hear, please spread the word. A very special thanks to Ed Delzeit for always believing in me, for all the incredible memories, and for showing me how to be a dad. I will miss you for the rest of my life. Visit the website, theghostsignalpodcast.com, to drop me a line, get into the Discord server, or check out the Ghost Signal Patreon. The Ghost Signal is executively produced by Jason Wilson, Patreon by Brooks Bigley, creative direction by Cassie, custom sound beds by J.M. Scherf, video editing by Hale, and I'm your ghost host with the most, Control Operator Jeff. Next time on the Ghost Signal is the conclusion of Hal and Sabrina's nightmarish story. Until then, dear listeners, ending transmission. Reach me at theghostsignalpodcast@gmail.com.
This has been a Grey Rooms production. Copyright 2021 and 2022.
The ghost signal is lost. Transmission terminated.